takeoff location instead of control station location. So
Mhm.
just a couple little things right there. The remote ID has been basically mandated by Congress. It's a congressional mandate. They said, FAA, this is what you got to do. Go do it. So they did, and they were ready to bring that out. And some of the security agencies got a hold of it and said, time out, let's wait. And so they added their 2 cents. And so they did about a year before they announced the final rule. They did announce the NPRM.
Mhm.
So it took them a little bit longer to get it out than they really wanted to, but it is out. And I think overall it's a good first step in getting basically UTM, so unmanned traffic management, going, and for the security aspect of drones in the national airspace system. Safety will also come into play as the skies get a little more crowded. But for the most part, I think it's a good step where we need to go in the right direction. And I've always been a proponent of RID, definitely an opponent of the NPRM in some of its areas. But it's a good first step. It really is.
When you say an opponent of the NPRM, what were some of those specific kind of items in there that you weren't favorable of?
The biggest one is not in the NPR, is not in the final rule, and that's the network connectivity issue. That was just a technical and logical nightmare to pull off. That doesn't mean it's not coming back at some point, but for now it's not part of the rule. And so that was the big part. Pilot location was a big issue, is still an issue. Part we need to work on. We need to we need to fight for the safety aspect of that for the remote pilots and for the hobbyists. This is not just remote pilots. This is also the hobbyist recreational flyers out there. They need to have that same safety mindset that we're required to here, and most of them do. Almost all of them do that I've talked with. And so those are the 2 big ones that we really didn't like. And one of them went away, and one of them, with the way the module or the Wi-Fi or Bluetooth will be used on the drones or on the controller, or it's on the drones actually. The area that people will be able to pick up the signal is very limited. So in a way, even the pilot location isn't as bad as it could have been, but it's still something that needs to be addressed.
This came up last week a little bit too. Do you know, or what would your guess be as to why the FAA is giving basically the public the location of the pilot? Like, I understand maybe the vehicle and who and what it's doing, but I think there were some questions around the reason behind that. And
well, it's not necessarily the FAA's reasoning; it's the security agency's reasoning. They would not sign off on the rule unless that was in there. So the federal security agency said we need to know, which makes sense. I mean, there could be some technical aspects of scrambling that aspect of the signal, but they need to know where the pilot is in order to take care of whatever they need to take care of for the standard remote ID.
And that's still information that's available to the public and additionally to law enforcement. Right.
It's going to be picked up on, just a simple phone, smart device, something like that. It will be able to be picked up via whether just an app or a dongle or whatever. It will be able to be picked up by the public.
Great. And we are coming to you guys live, so I'm just encouraging all listeners, please ask questions. I know there's a lot to unpack in remote ID operations over people and night flight, and we'll try to get to all of it today. Vic, you also mentioned network-based solution versus broadcast-based. You mentioned you were in favor of broadcast-based, which is what the final ruling comprises. Can you talk about maybe the pros and cons of each and the different approaches to creating a remote ID system that the FAA was considering?
Sure. A little bit. I'm not the technical guy. You need Kenji on for that. But with the internet-based system, so that the transmission system that was originally proposed, anybody with any knowledge of how to get on the internet and get into some of these different programs that will show us will be able to find any drone operator across the country, basically. So that was a huge issue with that, and there's some technical aspects behind it. And then the development of the module size, or the module or broadcast is probably the better term to use. That would be, again, it's just going to be less people knowing where you are. And so that's just going to be the huge issue of it. Now, the technical aspects, I don't know. They did have a big meeting, I think in March. I can't remember. They had a cohort meeting. They being the FAA and a bunch of different stakeholders. And that's when they decided that the broadcast system is the way to go.
Right.
I think that might have answered your question.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, I know one of the one question that was raised last week was what happens if you're flying in a rural area where you don't get this type of internet connection, and maybe that was another reason to lean on broadcast as opposed to a network-based solution where you can just get more people kind of on board.
Exactly.
Get that information.
And we've had some comments. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No disappointment about not having a network alternative at all, though?
Personally, no. I know that the telecom, obviously, we're not happy about it. The Alphabets and the Amazons and those guys were not terribly happy about it. But that's not to say it won't come back at some point. I just did not like at all having that aspect available. I don't see the reason behind it, but it will become probably at some point. When drone delivery becomes a thing, assuming it does, then I see that it would become more of a necessary. It would become more necessary to implement it. But no, as of right now, I see no reason to do it.
So it's really just in your perspective, kind of adding a layer of complication that the average DSP or pilot really doesn't need to consider at the scale of their operations.
Right, and that's really who I speak for at this point is the small and medium-sized DSPs. So I just don't see the benefit of doing that at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why we had you on, for that perspective.
Right.
Thank you.
And we got a lot of pilots too. We're asking questions about, what this means for them. How do they have to, or potentially you have to retrofit existing drones that they have? Again, we mentioned there's 30 months to basically comply with this. So there's plenty of time, plenty of time for companies to maybe create solutions or different products that can give the network that data. But, when pilots come up to you and say, okay, what does remote ID mean for me? And I know that's a pretty broad question, but, I guess what do you say to some of them?
I say it's going to be required. So let's just kind of suck it up and do it. But as far as, the retrofitability of drones, that's not going to be an issue. That's why they added that part into it. There was another win from the final rule versus the NPRM is we are going to be able to retrofit our drones, and they're not going to be that expensive to do. They're talking, I've seen numbers from $25 to $50 per module. So each commercial UAS is going to have its own module, but if you're a hobbyist, you can have one module and just bounce it between all the drones. So that's not going to be an issue either. I tell people not really to stress about it, not to worry about it. There was quite the big freak out in January when this all first started coming out, end of last year, as a matter of fact. And so the best thing to do is just kind of sit back, relax. You have plenty of time. We don't have to worry about it. And just kind of figure out where you fall in that category. And honestly, how many commercial folks are going to be using the same drone 32 months from last Friday that they're using? So things will probably be retrofittable, like I said, but also most of the commercial guys are going to start gals are going to be using new equipment by that point.
Right.
On that point, what do you expect the trends that might disrupt kind of the current framework or why do they have to be open? What changes do you kind of see coming down the pike in either size or detect and avoid capabilities that might actually affect the way this is framed?
Size first, that's the easy answer. They're going to be very small. They're going to be as small as possible. I'm seeing, gosh, if I remember correctly, there's one in France, I think is 18 grams. Don't quote me on that, but they're going to be very small. And I know for the FPV guys, grams are gold. So they try to shave them off as much as possible. But detect and avoid, I think this is the first step in that aspect of it. Obviously, our equipment's not going to be detect and avoid, but it will be detectable and avoidable, maybe is a better way to put that for future equipment. And that's where I see as the first step of UTM, RID being that first step. It's coming. But will it come to our Mavics and our Phantoms and our Autels and our Parrots? Probably not. Detectable, yes. Detect and avoid. It seems a little bit complex for our small little drones that we fly around.
So we've got over 30 viewers on Twitch, and I'm sure we have more on the other channels. Vic is open to questions if you want to ask him, or you could sit silently and enjoy.
Either one.
Vic, for the modules, the broadcast modules, are there solutions that are currently in production and are currently ready for drone pilots to purchase and put on their drones yet?
They're close. No, we're not quite at that stage. What they need to do is come up with the standards first. This is all performance-based regulation. So it's not, it's not, this is what you have to do. It's like, this is how you have to do it. This is what you have to do. And it's up to you to figure out how to do that. So you're waiting for standards. Like I'm sure ASTM will be the standard. It pretty much is everywhere else. And once they have the standards ready to submit to the FAA, and then the FAA approves them, which should be a pretty quick process, then the manufacturers who are ready, just waiting for those final little tweaks, once they know what the standards are, we'll be able to put that stuff out. But right now there's nothing that is readily available. It might be usable, but they're not going to put it out until they know what they have to do. I like to say it's kind of like the NTSB saying, okay, if your car is 5,000 pounds driving 50 miles an hour, you have to stop within X feet. You guys go figure out how to make it stop within X feet. Right. So that's probably the best analogy that I've been able to come up with so far.
So what's your least favorite thing about the current rule as it stands?
Oh, pilot location, 100%. 100%. We've had a lot of issues. I know people have been assaulted. I know people have been shot down. I've been blessed in that I've never, ever had a problem yet. But I know people who have, and if you get that crazy next door neighbor or even someone in the neighborhood who hears a drone and they pull up their little app and they come find us, that's a problem. And so we need to have the teeth and the laws that are out there now for interfering with flight crews. I think that'll help a lot, especially if it's used, as we mentioned earlier, immediately, frequently, and publicly once it does become law.
Yeah, we saw that on the last podcast from the chat, like the deep concern about states that are, open carry states or more loose on kind of gun restrictions, about what that interface with an angry person of the public.
Well, here in Colorado, we're an open carry state here in Colorado. And I have talked to drone pilots who do already and will plan on it. Now, do they really? I don't know. It's easy to have, it's easier to be an internet warrior these days. Personally, I have Barrett gel in my car. And if I feel like I'm in a neighborhood or an area that may or may not be the best place in the world, I carry that, or my VO carries that. So it's not frequent here in Colorado, but it's something I suggest people do, really, honestly. If some states don't even allow that. So, but don't start carrying if you are. It's just a good way. Your job is to de-escalate the situation.
Right. Yeah, de-escalation. And I mean, and we also talked, and I'm sure you'll agree, about our job as kind of bigger industry players to inform the public as much as possible, because that's probably the best form of de-escalation, is awareness in general.
Yep. Every time we put the drone up, we're drone ambassadors, and I like to try and keep people remember that. It's like, you're representing an entire new industry. Yes, we've been around for 7 years, but we're still a new industry, quickly becoming bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So we're all ambassadors one way or another.
Right.
So Scott's got a question. Can you talk about the timeline for when these rules go into effect and when you think suppliers will be ready?
Remote ID rules?
Yeah.
I'm assuming at this point. Like we said, remote ID, 18 months. Manufacturers who sell drones, most drones here in the United States have to be RID compliant, which means they have to adhere to the standards. And then we have 32 months from last Friday, the 15th. I think that ends up September 15th, 2023. It's 1 month or way or another. I think it's September 15th, 2023 is when we have to be compliant with anything we register. So any commercial drone that's used, if I've got my Mini, I've got it registered. And so I have to have RID on it. So this little guy has to have RID on it because I'm using it commercially or fly to FRYA.
Right.
So is it, perspectives on the FRYA, do you think the normal RC community is kind of upset with the framework here? Does it allow things to be more open than what was kind of on the table a year ago?
Yeah. Oh, it's a lot more open than what was on the table. So, it's good in that aspect. There are some limitations in the FRYA that causing a little bit of consternation within the community, within the RC and the FPV communities, where you have to fly within the geographical boundaries of the FRYA. So some of the ones here in Colorado aren't that big. You know, they've got land donated by a park or by a city or something like that. And, you know, they fly outside there because if you get more than about 3 or 4 RC folks in the air, they each need their own space. The fact that you can apply for them after the 12-month moratorium is huge. So you can apply for FRYA from here till eternity. And so that's a big win. The fact that it does not have to be a CBO is a big win. So if you're an educational institution, you can also apply for a FRYA. And I work with a couple of schools here in Denver. So that's really nice for them, that they're going to be able to apply for a FRYA and fly without, you know, have their students out there without remote ID. In the other aspect, they talked originally about including cities inside in the group that can apply for FRYAs, and I think it was a big mistake on their part not to include them, because you've got, I can think of 3 here in Lakewood where I live, Colorado. We've got 3 parks we can fly in. Douglas County has some parks they can fly in. Littleton has some parks they can fly in, and then they would then have to go to a CBO and ask them to run their park. And I think cities and municipalities should be able to apply for a FRYA as well. What I've suggested to Mayor Troxel, he has not gotten back to me yet. I'm sure he's busy too. I was looking forward to working with him on the DAC, but he's no longer there. He's the mayor of Fort Collins, and he was the representative for the National League of Cities. So what I would suggest to the NLC is that they form their own CBO. It shouldn't be that difficult to do. And then the cities that are part of NLC can then just use their CBO to keep their parks open that are open, and set up their own rules that way.
What about the perspective that's been around for a while now that this will kind of limit younger people from getting involved or interested in aviation because RC was kind of a start for them? Do you feel like the limitations are too complex for, let's say, somebody who's 14 and their parent is not already native to avionics?
I kind of see it, the first aspect of remote ID, like the ability to see the pilot. When you're under the age of consent, then that there's some questions there that need to be answered as well. But you know, I don't know if RC is either the gateway drug or the first step into aviation. It depends on how you want to look at it. But it is huge. And you talk to the pilots and mechanics and folks like that these days, like, oh yeah, you know, I went down to AMA Field and Uncle Joe showed me how to do that. I still see that as happening, especially if we can get the FRYAs opened up quite a bit around the city parks, that kind of thing. I still see that as happening, but the fact that you now have to go to a FRYA may be a little bit of a stumbling block for some people, especially if there's not one around. Some of the smaller towns here in Colorado, out on the Eastern Plains or up in the mountains, they're not going to have a local FRYA. So in that aspect of it, I see that as being a little bit of a detriment to bringing people into the aviation industry. So hopefully that's addressable at some point as well.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't that concerned about it 2 years ago. But I was probably more militant on the other side, not having enough perspective. But I do think there is something to that. If you're not getting it in the hands of young people, and that there's kind of an easy entry point for them, then you're basically closing off your future. And this industry needs growth. We got a question. New York State is interested in speaking to drone. Nope, that's a plug. Never mind.
Hey, who called me a goon? I can't read that. I'm not perfect on the date. So
Kenji.
Kenji.
Yeah.
Oh,
you and I'll talk offline, Kenji.
Yeah.
He's having fun trolling you in the chat.
Oh, he trolls me all the time. So yeah, no, I'm not perfect. If there's a mistake I made, put it out there.
We should have had you sign a waiver.
Yeah.
I don't need one. I won't sue. Kenji's my lawyer.
Kenji will sue us. Oh, well, then we're good.
No, he's not.
So in addition to remote ID, let's talk a little bit about operations over people. So February 13th, 2019, the FAA issued an NPRM titled Operation of Small Unmanned Aircraft Systems Over People, which proposed to modify regulations to permit routine operations of small unmanned aircraft over people and at night under certain conditions. The final rule amends Part 107 by permitting routine operations of small unmanned aircraft over people, moving vehicles, and at night under certain conditions. The big news here is that the rule allows over moving people and the humans inside them. So I think they said beyond cars and trucks, this can include roller coasters, bicycles, jet skis, and more. What do you make of the operations over people ruling, Vic? I know a lot of it, like we mentioned, is performance based, and it gets a little bit in the weeds. There's 4 different categories, but at a high level, what can you say about it?
I think it's huge. I think it's huge in that ops over people and BB loss, which is not addressed here, but those are the 2 big stumbling blocks for being able to scale an operation. Mm-hmm. Those rules actually do start March 16th, not in its entirety. And a lot of people are oh, hey, we can fly at night over people with anything we want on March 16th, which is not true. People need to understand that especially the ops over people will be incrementally brought in. So that is just, it's going to help make more flights legal, I think. I think it's safe to say that if you fly in an urban environment, it'd be very, very difficult for you to say, I've never flown over people. I have never intentionally flown over people, but I would be amazed if there was some way to go back at my flight logs with all my hours in the air and figure out if I was flying over people or not. It's a safety issue. It really is. And having the different categories will make things safer for us, and the limitations in each one of those categories. Just don't jump in your M600 and go fly over people on March 16th. Still not legal.
Right.
And the night ops also, it's just, we had, I want to say 3,500 or 45, I can't remember the exact number of 10729 waivers with impeccable records. So following the rules, flying safe, kind of proved to the FAA and the DOT, it's like, you know what, flying at night is not that big a deal. So they're just including that in the new initial 107 test and the recurrent 107 online training. Mm-hmm. So once you do that, you don't need your waivers anymore.
So what constitutes night? Because is it when the sun is already down, or does it begin before that? It's the 30-minute rule. It's the 30-minute rule. You've got twilight, so 30 minutes after sunset, 30 minutes before sunrise. Anything in between that is the night. It's different in Alaska. That's a totally different ball of wax. But in general, it's the 30-minute twilight rule. It's either daylight, twilight, or night. So night is where you're going to do that. You're going to need your 3 statute mile strobes, and then you're going to need the recurrent training or the initial testing that will go over some of the nighttime illusions and that kind of stuff.
So if I wanted to fly over people, 6 months ago, what was that process, or was I able to at all? And with or without Part 107, and then it kind of in layman's terms, how has that changed since the ruling?
Well, before you needed a waiver, period. Mm-hmm. You can still get a waiver after March 16th. It'd be waiverable outside of the specifications for the 4 categories. So it's not like they're doing away with 107. I think that's a 3.9 waiver. It'll still exist. But if you can fly within these categories, then you don't need the waiver. So that's changing only in the fact that it's going to make it easier for a lot of, especially smaller operations who don't have the wherewithal or the desire to go out and put a, Indemis or a Para Zero or something on their bird and then apply for a waiver to then fly over people. I think that was a big stumbling block for a lot of people who wanted to expand their operations safely.
Right.
Waivers in general are not an easy process.
No, they're really not. I mean, the night waiver or daylight waiver, became a pretty easy process. I've had the FAA people describe it, and I've seen it written as well, as like the FAA said, bring me a rock, and that's your waiver. And then you bring them a rock, and they say, no, bring me a different rock. And then you figure out which rock they want you to bring them, and they finally give you your waiver.
This is not sufficiently rocky.
Yeah, exactly. No, we wanted a blue rock, not a red rock. Oh, that one's wet. I want a dry one. Yeah, so exactly.
More like limestone, because
exactly. Exactly. A little mica in there for prettiness.
And then back to, we talked about flying at night. So flying at night will now require new but less training and new equipment. Operating drones at night will require remote pilots to take updated training and to test run the machines. Small unmanned drones flying night will also have to be equipped with anti-collision lights that can be seen for 3 miles, the FAA said.
Yep.
How do you know if your lights are visible from 3 miles? And is that weather contingent, or is it just in clear weather? My lights can be seen by 3 miles. I'm essentially following requirements.
If your light can't be seen 3 miles away, then your drone can't be seen 3 miles away, and you're flying under minimum. So don't do that anyway. Okay. But it's basically, there's no certified FAA strobe. And they do have to be strobes. They can't just be lights. They have to be strobes that blink with sufficient pattern to avoid collision, or whatever the wording is. It's not 5 times a second or 1 time every 5 seconds. It's just, you do your testing. To date, there are a few different light manufacturers, strobe manufacturers, that do claim they're 10729 compliant, and they are, but that's not to say that they all are. The little ARCs first came out, they weren't. They were, but they were basically just under ideal circumstances. I test mine. I test different ones. I've got a perfect place here in Lakewood where there's a park on one side of a valley and a parking lot on the other side of the valley. It's exactly 3 miles apart. So nice. I'll have my VO sit there and my family, turn these strobes on and off. Test them yourself. If it's a brand name drone or a brand name strobe, odds are, in some of their newer, nicer ones, odds are you're fine. But it's up to you as a remote pilot in command to make sure they are 3 statute miles. So it never hurts to check.
Right.
So how are you expecting this to affect your business in the next year or two? Is it going to even change your patterns at all? It seems like maybe no.
No, it's the new rules will not for me, except for over people. I will probably take advantage of that, especially if there's some way that like my little Mini will be updatable to have an automatic motor kill, rather than, obviously, if you put cages on it, you can't fly it over people anymore under Category 1. But other than that, really, I'm not going to change a lot. I will have to take the recurrent training because my waiver goes away 120 days after publication. I forgot now, but I think that's right. And so everybody's waiver does. Everybody's 2.9 waiver expires. And so they will need to take the recurrent training. One issue that has been raised and the FAA is working on, that's the only quote I can get is we're working on it, is I have a number of airspace authorizations tied to my waiver so I can fly at night in controlled airspace. And there's not a vehicle yet set up that will allow me to do that. And if that's not done, which I think it will be, I have faith in the FAA that they'll get it done. Fingers crossed. There's going to be some lost revenue there, or illegal flights, depending on the pilot. I fly regularly at night in a zero grid at DIA for a client, and if my COA no longer is active at night, then I'm kind of in trouble. So they are going to work that out, and I also fly here at Centennial pretty often at night. So they will work that out. That's the only stumbling block I see at this point as far as how I'll continue doing my operations.
You bring up a good point about compliance, right? So even like intent to comply versus what is actually, enacted in the field. Do you feel like we're moving towards more compliance with the rules, or is it just? I'm always looking towards adoption because, or otherwise this becomes kind of kabuki theater. On some level,
I haven't heard it described that. That's good. The new rules, I think compliance is going to, I don't want to say slam dunk, but I think it's going to be, especially for the night rules, the night operations rules, compliance is actually going to go up. So because it's just going to be so much easier to do it, and you're not going to have to bring the FAA a rock. So that, I think the night aspect of it, over people ops, I think eventually the compliance rate will go up. Simply because you're going to be able to have that Category 2, which is, I think, going to be the biggest part for non-set type operations, that the compliance on that aspect of it will go up as well. Will it ever be 100%? No, it's not going to happen. Nothing is compliant. You go 56 or 60 down the highway when it's 55. So same dealio there. So I see it I see compliance with the remote ID becoming fairly standard, especially as more and more drones fall into the standard category, because the other ones are going to go away. All the new ones will become compliant.
So we got a pull quote from Scott. The small unmanned aircraft has lighted anti-collision lighting visible for at least 3 statute miles that has a flash rate sufficient to avoid collision. So
yep, that's the word. Is that Schnappman or Scott?
Yeah.
I always butcher his last name. Sorry, dude. Yeah, no, thanks for that. Yeah.
Yeah, Scott, I'd have you on the podcast sooner, but then who would ask all the questions?
Exactly. No, he's the plant.
Yeah, right.
He's been on a few of them with me and Kenji as well. So no, he's great to have on. He brings up some good points.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about compliance a little bit. I want to so if we're talking about compliance and potential enforcement for remote ID, potential punishments for not complying. Was there any clarity? I mean, again, we're 30 months out from when you really need to comply, but have you seen anything about that, or how the FAA is going to find drones that aren't complying with remote ID and potentially track them and talk to the pilot?
That's going to be up to local law enforcement. There's already, there's wording in the 2018 at this point, FAA Reauthorization Act 19, I can't remember, that says that if law enforcement now comes up to you and says, I need to see this, I need to see that, you have to show it to them. I always tell people to do it anyway, because why not? Just de-escalate the situation, as we mentioned before. But they are going to rely on the boots on the ground, for lack of a better word, to do that. And if a law enforcement comes up and says, what are you doing? And they're going to have a specific set of boxes to tick, for lack of better words. And then as they get the information, then they will then forward it on to FSDO or whoever. And that's where the enforcement aspect of it. The FAA is not going to have, drive their little ASIs aren't going to be, not their little, the ASIs aren't going to drive around in their little cars, with all these remote ID apps running on their phone looking for people. It's just not going to happen. There's not going to be they can't go back in history and check flights for the most part, unless you're part of a smart city situation. So there's not going to be the forensic aspect of it. But if a police officer shows up, you're going to be on record. Or if there's the nosy neighbor who has one of these apps running all the time so they can find all the drones in the neighborhood, then yeah, maybe, because they'll go, hey, there was so and so. They'll be the one with the non-emergency number on their speed dial.
I'm just thinking of every person I know with a police scanner.
taking the airspace into their own hands.
Exactly. Could it happen? Absolutely. I think the more drones become accepted, the less all this worry is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking about, what you're talking about, not having forensics now. And, maybe we're kind of in a golden kind of area where, because that data is not available, you actually can operate more freely. Do you see like a future where it becomes too tied down for the individual pilot operator?
Too tied down? I don't think so. Because I don't think anybody wants to shut anybody down. At least, the FAA doesn't, DHS might, but that's a whole nother thing. I don't think it's ever going to be used punitively as far as new regulation. Will it restrict some operations? Likely, maybe in an urban environment, downtown Denver, a great example. Will there be more regulation that might restrict some of the smaller operators? Maybe. I might even say probably, but that's down the road. That's way down the road, I think.
Yeah, that would be a good problem to have, right? That we have
it would be
so many operators that enough people are concerned for restricting this specific type of operation.
Right, and maybe down the road there is a notify and fly kind of situation in a very heavily urban environment where you're going to have the hospitals and the Amazon and those folks doing the drone delivery if and when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, controversial question just to keep people's blood up.
Yay.
Are Wing and Amazon and the whole delivery kind of conversation a good thing for individual DSPs for moving the market forward, or does it just bring unwanted attention for things that are not necessarily realistic and on the table yet, and therefore, just cause negative attention for you?
How do I answer that? Well, and not to be, and I'm not being cut, not being, I'm not looking for a landmine here. I think it's personally, I think it's not going to happen as much as people think it is, but that's Vic being Vic, and I may be dead wrong. I'll freely admit that, but I don't think currently it's being used within the industry as that much of a stumbling block. There are certainly those outside the industry. It's like, well, I don't want those things flying over my house, and I'm going to shoot them down. So I'm going to shoot you down. That mentality. I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal currently. I really don't. That's just me.
Yeah. Well, Vic, I want to talk, you mentioned remote ID apps. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that, I noticed in the ruling is there isn't some sort of one size fits all remote ID app that everyone knows they need to broadcast their data to. So I guess, what does that ecosystem and infrastructure potentially look like? And I know there's so many unknowns, but, if you were to potentially design it, what were some of the things you would think that would be important? I mean, are we going to have multiple players that are creating different remote ID apps that you can, kind of broadcast to, and then law enforcement somehow has access to all of them? I guess, how does that build out? And again, there's so much time, but what do we think?
It's going to be multiple players. It has to be multiple players, both on the app side and on the module side. It's a free market. Will the app be free and then you have to click through all the ads so you don't have to pay for it? Or will you, be $5 to pay for it?
Freemium.
Exactly. Don't want to see those ads? Give us $5. So I can see that as on the app side or the dongle side, depending on how it's probably going to be app, not dongle. On the civilian side of things, I see it working that way. Mm-hmm. And this is just pure speculation on my part, but I think with the law enforcement side, nowadays, you don't have everybody on the shift as a DUI officer. Everybody on the shift's not a canine officer. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine that there'll be the UAS officers on each shift, however many, depending on the size of the force, obviously. And if there's a call, whatever, somebody peeping, whatever, then the closest officer is going to respond, and then the UAS officer will show up. Now, all officers are probably going to have apps on their phones. They all have them already. Some carry two, a personal and a one for their job. So I imagine everybody will have the apps. The process they have to adhere to once they get the information, is probably going to be fairly specific. And I'm totally guessing here. I don't think it's fair for every single police officer out there to have to know all the nuances of every single UAS law around. So they have enough stuff to do. We don't need to add to that as an industry.
Yeah, they have enough laws on the ground to worry about enforcing and learning about. I think Kenji here echoed your statement. It says multiple players. He said law enforcement may have a separate app that can access the FAA database. Which I think is interesting.
Maybe. And Scott also brought up a good point, because I can just see his name, that you'll have law enforcement will have LEAP, which is law enforcement assistant program officers that they can work with, or agents actually. And I'm gonna put the Drone Pro hat back on for a minute. Drone Pros also will be tasked with working with police departments. I already do that, and as do others when it comes to drone regulation. And with that, so the not only LEAP but also the FSDO drone, or the FAA safety team drone pros, local drone pros. So if you're a law enforcement officer, ask your agency to reach out to FSDO and see who can come in.
So it seems like there's going to be layers of support for law enforcement, so it's not entirely on their shoulders to fully understand UAS regulation.
It's not fair.
Yeah, it's too much, and depending on where you are. Some departments are large enough, like you said, that all they need is one person with half an inkling of interest, and they could sustain kind of, the extra hit to the budget or time off for that officer to learn these things. Right. Whereas, with smaller, kind of more distributed precincts, you always run into that. Can we even get the tool to them? Do they have to? Can they have a centralized location that they could call into if they need a tool? Same thing goes for enforcement, right?
There's a good example of that would be, I've worked this last summer. I worked with a police department called Lakeside Police Department here in Colorado and Denver. The town itself, I think, has 8 full-time residents, but it also encompasses Lakeside Amusement Park. So their officer corps, I think, is 14 officers. So the cops outnumber the residents.
Right.
And so they had to, they brought me in because they were having some issues with people flying over the park, and I was trying to explain the rules to them with that. And so, yeah, in a situation like that, it's really hard for them to justify that. But Denver's got 20,000 police officers. I don't know. That's a number I pulled out of thin air. And they're going to be much more better equipped to do that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, Vic, I know we're kind of coming up on an hour. Any kind of, I guess, final thoughts? I mean, I think, we're transitioning to a new year, some big rulings at the end of last year. Still in the pandemic, but just, kind of holistically, super high level drone industry, are you pleased with some of the progress the FAA has been making? I think on the podcast, in the comments, we hear both sides. We hear some people very pleased with the progress the FAA is making, think they're actually moving pretty quickly, especially in 2020. Some people obviously would like to see it go quicker. But any kind of final thoughts on the industry right now?
I'm still bullish on the industry. I think we're going places. I think we might have topped the curve here a little bit, but there's still things we're going to be doing 5 years from now we haven't even thought of yet. So as far as the future of the industry, we're here. We're here to stay. So we're not going anywhere. Individual aspects of it may change. You're going to see a lot of automation, obviously, with things, program flights. There was the recent, totally remote flight that was done when this month or last month, where there was nobody there when the drone took off. It's obviously in a very experimental stage in very limited areas, but I see that as being part of the future. I think the creative side, whether it be stills or movie industry, any of that creative stuff will never go fully automatic because they just can't. No AI can think like a human being when it comes to creativity. And so that aspect of things won't change too much. As far as the FAA moving fast enough, they're moving a lot faster than they ever have in history. Right. And so that is huge. And they're the first one to say that's like, we've never had to move this fast before. They're still not moving as fast as the industry is changing. But they're reaching out to outside sources for that. And so that's very helpful, that they're able to adapt this quickly. People are still wanting to go faster, but those are the people who probably have more private business experience than government experience. And yeah, it would be nice if they can move as fast as the industry does, but I think that's a big, tall ask for any agency to move as fast as whatever industry they're in charge of.
I don't think regulation is never going to keep up with technology, and you're regulating essentially a changing industry. So how do you put on a framework that's adaptable and forward thinking, but also effective for what's happening today?
One of the people I was on the DAC task group, I think it was number 5. Anyway, dealt with the waiver aspect of things. And one of the people in the waiver office basically said, working with the waivers right now is like trying to put together a treadmill based on the instructions as the treadmill's moving. So it is really difficult for them to do what they're doing, but they're trying. That doesn't mean they need to be, they don't need to be held accountable in some aspects of it, but they really are trying.
Yeah, in many ways, the FAA is actually being tasked to regulate a technology or understand a technology in ways that other institutions in government aren't. Right? When you think about software, it's just like, well, whatever, let it happen, and we'll deal with consequences with regular law. Whereas this, because of the nature of it intersecting with traditional aviation and potentially airplanes, kind of requires their attention in a way that it doesn't normally for government institutions. I think that's where a lot of the headaches, frustration, and aggravation particularly come from.
Yep. Right. And one other quick thing I do want to note is make sure you understand the rules about overpeopling and the rules about night flights. This is not a free-for-all on March 16th. There are still regulations that need to take place. You still need to become current with the new training. Or take the initial and understand all that stuff. Also, this morning, I got confirmation earlier that remote ID will be on the recurrent. So you'll need to be up on that. Well, you will become up on that because it's not a recurrent test, it's a recurrent training. I still keep using the test word occasionally. So that aspect of remote ID will be on the recurrent training.
One final thing, actually. Congress requested something from the FAA on BV loss. Is that correct? They wanted to see some sort of I don't know if it was they wanted an NPRM to come out, but I know there was some sort of talk about getting the FAA moving a little bit on BV loss regulation.
Everybody's asking the FAA to move on BV loss, but I did not know it was I didn't know the Congress had chimed in on that. So that's that's the last major stumbling block for being able to scale operations.
Right. All right, well, we'll see what happens this year.
Exactly.
Thanks again. Yeah. Hopefully another big year. I mean, like we said, the drone industry changes so quickly. Who knows where we'll be at this point next year. So
right.
It's exciting though. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you for all the great questions. We'll be back here, same time, same place next week. And thanks, Vic, so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
So
absolutely.
everybody have a great week.